This video started off as me rewatching Man of Steel before the James Gunn Superman comes out. Bottom line, Man of Steel is a very flawed movie. But on reflection, I was mostly left wondering, are we, on a societal level, actually capable of making a good Superman movie anymore? The last solid version of Superman was probably Lois and Clark in the 90s, maybe Smallville in the 2000s, but honestly I've never watched it. So it's basically at least 20 years, maybe 30, since we got a version of Superman that felt right. I think Superman Returns from 2006 was pretty boring, and I certainly don't rate the CW versions. It's not just Superman that no one seems to be able to get right. This is part of the seemingly endless list of stuff like Indiana Jones, Lord of the Rings, and probably a dozen other examples of things that have been reimagined for the modern audience, basically injecting urban monoculture 21st century values into them and becoming financial disasters. You could make the well-trodden argument that these franchises, intellectual properties, important cultural landmarks have been hijacked by people, activists, who, in the most charitable interpretation, don't understand them. That's not really a sufficient explanation. Even people who were involved in making some of these 20th century cultural landmarks don't seem to be able to replicate the magic. As well as Man of Steel, I also recently watched Ready Player One, a 2010s movie made by Steven Spielberg. Spielberg was the undisputed king of the box office in the 80s and early 90s. Ready Player One, released as a movie in 2018, is basically a 1980s nostalgia fest, packed full of references to my own childhood, and I found it limp and flat in the same way Man of Steel is limp and flat. Ready Player One has lots of Spielberg touchstones: the orphaned main character, the corporate baddies, the swelling orchestral music, but it's not the sum of its parts. It's just the parts, and they don't come together. Even the guy who basically personifies late 20th century cinema can't revive these cultural touchstones, so why do we expect that anyone else would be able to? I'd argue the problem with all these remakes and reboots is deeper than the well-rehearsed arguments about activism. Maybe the society that we've become doesn't understand these pieces of culture anymore, can't mentally model the people who made them successful, and therefore even a good faith attempt to make a Superman movie is not going to be able to replicate the things that made them popular back in the day. The Western world, the US, Britain, and other English-speaking countries in Europe have changed in numerous and negative ways in the last 25 years. Superman is fundamentally optimistic. It's about hope, justice, and the American way. A brief overview of Western politics and culture over the first quarter of this century would show that on balance, we, and I mean we as in people who look at the world from a Western perspective, increasingly lack hope, don't believe in the possibility of justice, don't have empathy for people who disagree with us, and are ruled by people who don't believe in the ideals of America or the UK or the West in general. The Christopher Reeve version of Superman, still probably the best on screen, was released in the late 1970s, and the first couple of those movies capture something of the sense of hope and optimism that existed in the 80s and 90s. People used to talk about the year 2000, about exploring space, about the future and what new technology would do for us. In the 2020s, people talk about race and gender and systemic oppression and how technology will make us all unemployed. Negativity and victimhood seem to have become the defining features of modern culture. So instead of the Christopher Reeve Superman, we get downbeat superheroes. Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, Captain America Winter Soldier being seen as the best movie in the MCU, Tony Stark's sacrifice at the end of Endgame. These movies resonated with audiences because they seem to speak to what we're living through. But this is supposed to be a review of Man of Steel, so let's get to it. On paper, there's so much going for it. Henry Cavill looks perfect, like this little mini beacon of hope stuck in the wrong movie. The director, Zack Snyder, had already done Watchmen and 300 before this. Scriptwriter David S. Goyer had already written the Dark Knight trilogy. The soundtrack is from Hans Zimmer, who did the music for Thelma and Louise, Forrest Gump, The Lion King, Gladiator, and dozens of other movies you've heard of. Michael Shannon, playing General Zod, was doing an epic performance in HBO's Boardwalk Empire at the time Man of Steel came out. Russell Crowe plays Superman's dad, but like Ready Player One, it's just parts and it doesn't come together. In the early part of the movie, before Henry Cavill puts the cape on, he's kind of already doing the job of Superman, living an itinerant life, but aware of his powers and using them to save people where he can, like on a burning oil rig. Superman on the down low, I suppose. That's an interesting idea. I wonder whether Superman on the down low could have been extended to a whole movie, with Henry Cavill secretly doing good works while trying to stay undetected. But to help the plot happen, he finds a ship, finds the suit, activates a beacon, which brings other Kryptonians to Earth. As in the comics, Superman, Clark Kent or Kal-El, is sent to Earth by his parents because their world, Krypton, is dying. We see the planet explode, but for some reason, criminals on Krypton are sentenced to suspended animation off-planet. So while all the law-abiding Kryptonians are dead, the bad ones, led by General Zod, wake up and get to carry on living. Once Superman finds the Kryptonian scout ship and puts his suit on, they follow the beacon to Earth, which Zod and his minions decide they're going to terraform and turn into the new Krypton. Humans, of course, will all die out. Zod isn't really bothered by this. So the movie is basically Superman finding his identity and then having to fight off Zod. There's not much room for hope, not much room for things that have made Superman, particularly the Christopher Reeves Superman, so engaging. Maybe the overwhelming emotion in the movie is anxiety. Anxiety from Clark Kent and his parents about his growing abilities. There are regular flashbacks to Clark's childhood, seeming to cherry-pick the dangerous and unhappy parts. There's anxiety from regular people about the new aliens. There's anxiety from Zod about the future of New Krypton. Where's the hope here? The tone is perfect for Batman, and as I mentioned, the writer of Man of Steel also wrote the Dark Knight trilogy. There's definite consistency in his writing, but what was needed was variety. Then there's Zack Snyder. He was perfect for both Watchmen and 300, masculine, aggressive movies that fit with the new tone of superhero films in the 2000s. In Man of Steel, he perfects the style of action sequence he's become notorious for. Expensive-looking CGI rubble, a landscape of complete destruction, so it's difficult to see a narrative for the fight. Lots of chopping from close-ups to wide shots, overblown and tedious. Even a soundtrack by Hans Zimmer doesn't make any difference. In fact, after working on Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman, Zimmer publicly stated he wasn't going to work on any more superhero movies, a decision he reversed only 3 years later for a movie not directed by Zack Snyder. The biggest disappointment was probably Michael Shannon as General Zod. Like I mentioned, it's probably his role in Boardwalk Empire that got him cast in Man of Steel. And his General Zod just feels like a variation on that character. It's a bit of a pantomime villain, a bit shouty, not menacing enough to hate, and lacking any fun or humour to enjoy. So the tone, the script, the music, the casting, a lot of it is just wrong. There are some good things. Amy Adams as Lois Lane is a bit of a girl boss at first. By the end of the movie, I liked her portrayal. For me, she worked well with Henry Cavill. I loved the scene on the military base where she gets to name him Superman. Although the flashbacks were overdone, I liked Kevin Costner and Diane Lane as Clark's parents, and Russell Crowe as Jor-El had just enough to do. There's a great use of the insult Dick Splash, which I personally haven't used in ages. Man of Steel might be worth watching as a curiosity if you're a big fan of the character. But like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm not convinced we're capable of making a proper Superman movie, that we have the understanding to put a hopeful and optimistic version of the character on the screen. Although, I really hope that the James Gunn Superman movie proves me wrong. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing.